Tonight's big stories. Vice President Sara Duterte marches to Malacanang to quit the Marcos cabinet, marking a formal and what seems like a bitter end to their Uniteam alliance.
Questions now are being raised over whether VP Sara will become the new face of the opposition. Her ally, Harry Roque, certainly thinks so. We'll break this down with our resident political analyst, Richard Haydarian, later on.
And AFP Chief General Romeo Bronner Jr. files to the Western Command in Palawan to check in on the sailors injured during the skirmish with the Chinese Coast Guards at Ayungin Shoal.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Gretchen Ho.
I suppose you could call it the mother of all breakups. We begin tonight with Vice President Sara Duterte putting the final nail on the Uniteam coffin as she resigns from the Marcos cabinet in a shock move, giving up her post as Education Secretary and Vice Chairperson of the NTF-LCAC. Duterte says she will continue to serve as Vice President.
President Marcos accepted Duterte's resignation, though Malacanang said she declined to give a reason. At a press con earlier today, Duterte also did not explain why she quit, but would only say this should not be taken as a sign of weakness.
Sa 2 taon nating pagsasama, ang kwentong nabuo natin ay kwento ng kapit-bisig na pagtaguyod sa adhikaing maitatag ang isang bansang makabata at batang makabansa. Ngunit anumang kwento, kahit gaano kaganda, ay sadyang nagtatapos rin. Earlier today, June 19, 2024, I sought an audience with the President and tendered my resignation as the Secretary of Education effective July 19, 2024. I have given my 30-day notice to ensure the proper and orderly transition for the benefit of the next Secretary. Ang aking pagbibitiw ay hindi lulan ng kahinaan, kundi dala ng tunay na malasakit para sa ating mga guro at kabataang Pilipino. Bagamat hindi ako magpapatuloy na mamamahala sa kagawaran, patuloy pa rin nating itataguyod ang kalidad ng edukasyon na nararapat para sa Pilipino.
For most of her speech, Duterte looked back on the past 2 years that she served as DepEd Secretary. She listed out all its achievements under her leadership and thanked LGU's stakeholders, DepEd personnel, teachers, and everyone who helped the agency. Duterte's resignation as DepEd Chief takes effect on July 19. Reporters tried to ask her questions, but she immediately left the building after reading her prepared speech.
Hindi man ako ang tumatayong kalihim ng edukasyon, mananatili akong isang ina na nagmamatyag at titindig para sa kapakanan ng bawat guro at bawat mag-aaral sa Pilipinas. Para sa isang matatag na Pilipinas. Mga kababayan, lahat ng ating ginagawa ay para sa Diyos, sa bayan at bawat pamilyang Pilipino. Syukuran. Thank you.
One question.
In a very short statement issued by Presidential Communications Office Secretary Sheloy Garafil afterwards, Garafil said she declined to give a reason why she will continue to serve as Vice President, and we thank her for her service.
DepEd spokesperson attorney Michael Poa, who has in the past spoken for the Vice President, said in a statement, "We understand that most are curious as to the reason behind such decision, but what is of greater and pressing importance is that a proper transition be made for the next Secretary." He also asked for patience, especially from the media, as he says that they will not be taking interviews on the matter during the transition period.
For its part, the NTF-LCAC says Duterte's tenure as Vice Chairperson of the task force was marked by significant progress in their efforts to address the root causes of insurgency. The anti-communist task force also expressed gratitude for Duterte's contributions and leadership.
Key allies of the Dutertes believe that Sara's resignation marks the beginning of her becoming the new face of the opposition. In a statement, former Duterte spokesperson Roque said, Uniteam has formally been dissolved and she has just become the leader of the opposition. The line has been drawn. He goes on to say, the Philippines finally has a real leader. Onwards to transparency, accountability, peace, and security. Let's redeem the Philippines. Meanwhile, former Rodrigo Duterte legal advisor Sal Padelo says, Sara stepping down from the cabinet shows that she has delicadeza now that she and President Marcos no longer see eye to eye on certain policies. Panelo believes she felt upset that Marcos did not defend her from issues around her confidential funds and against supposed attacks from the lower house.
The resignation of VP Sara is or means this is a new political ballgame. At marami ang matutuwa sa ginawa niya. Kung titingnan mo yung mga statements niya, meron na siyang meron na siyang talagang banat. Kinokontra niya talaga yung major policy ng administrasyon. Kahit sinong nasa posisyon, at ikaw ang vice presidente, cabinet secretary ka, eh siyempre naghahanap ka rin ng kalinga ng iyong principal.
Meanwhile, Marcos's sister and Duterte ally, Senator Amy Marcos, said in a statement addressed to Sara, "Ako ay iyong kasama sa bawat hakbang, bawat araw at bawat laban dahil iisa lamang ang nais natin, magwagi at magtagumpay ang mahal nating Pilipinas." Senator Bato de la Rosa, another Duterte ally, said that whatever Sara's reason may be, he believes it was well thought of and that she took the best interest of the people into consideration. Senate President Cheese Escudero, for his part, says, "I believe her resignation was inevitable from the time her father, FPRRD, and her siblings and allies started attacking PBBM and members of the First Family. Its inevitability became more pronounced when she was already silent and not expressing her support on certain policy issues such as the West Philippine Sea, the Bagong Pilipinas hymn, the Kibuloy cases, and attempted arrest."
Senator Win Gatchalian was asked whether he believes the Uniteam no longer exists, and here is his response.
I'm part of the Unity team kasi diba last
Tumakbo kayo.
2022 I ran under the Unity team ticket. Hindi pa naman namin napag-uusapan kung as a Uniteam ano yung direction ng Uniteam, no? After the election, very loose yung amin pag-uusap. So tingin ko maaga pa para sabihin kung ano yung magiging kalalabasan ng Uniteam.
But the analysts we've spoken to all agree on one thing, and that is this is not the end of it, that there are more political maneuverings to come. Earlier this evening, University of the Philippines Professor Antonio Contreras spoke to our sister show, Sa Totoo Lang, and he had some ideas about who should take Sara's place as Education Secretary.
If I were to advise the president, get someone from the traditional political opposition who may be your allies now, and get someone who is an educator or at least of credentials and educational management. Posible si Mar Rojas.
Oh.
Actually, sabi ko nga, baka si Leni Robredo. Baka si sino pa ba? Baka si Laila de Lima, di ba? Malay mo. Di ba marami tayong pwedeng ilagay na pangalan, pero I think kung gusto lang talaga ng presidenteng mang-asar, ang ilalagay niya dyan, yung dating yellow, na may credential sa education.
Well, certainly nothing is permanent in politics, and this resignation by VP Sara is being seen as another turning point. Let's take a look back at the very short life of the Uniteam. Now, it was back in November 2021 when Marcos and Sara Duterte officially teamed up under the Uniteam banner. It was an unexpected pairing. In fact, on October 2, 2021, Sara Duterte filed her certificate of candidacy as mayoral aspirant for Davao City. but the two were able to leverage their respective voter bases in the so-called Solid North and in Davao. This formidable alliance gave them a landslide victory in the 2022 polls, the first time in many years where a strong majority vote was seen. Marcos appointed VP Sara as DepEd chief, although Marcos said as early as the campaign trail that she had wanted the defense post. Now fast forward to May of 2023, VP Sara's ally in Congress, former President Gloria Arroyo, gets demoted from her post as senior deputy speaker. Days later, she would post a cryptic message about a certain ambitious tambaloslos, a term referring to a greedy mythical creature with a large mouth. VP Sara would later on resign from Lakas CMD, the political party she used to share with House Speaker Martin Romualdez. From there, the relationship between VP Sara and the House leadership continued soaring, with the lower house very publicly scrapping her request for confidential funds for both the office of the Vice President and the DepEd. Now, come 2024, we saw more telltale signs of strained relations between the President and VP Sara, especially after word got around that the International Criminal Court was investigating former President Duterte's war on drugs. VP Sara also showed up to the prayer rallies in Davao City, during which her brother, Mayor Baste Duterte, called on President Marcos to resign, and also describing him as lazy and lacking compassion. And of course, this didn't sit well with Marcos supporters, especially First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos, who got candid about it in an interview with TV personality Anthony Taberna or Katunying. The First Lady made headlines for saying about Sara, bad shot na sakin yan. This leads us to today's resignation. It came as a shock for most, though some analysts pointed to one more sign in the few days before when VP Sara was quoted as saying the Uniteam was a tandem during the 22 elections. We are no longer candidates.
Well, when you lay it all down flat like that, I know
It's understandable.
There have been telltale signs all along.
And the progression happened bit by bit,
That's
piece
right.
by piece.
Exactly. So to help us make sense of all these political moves, we have with us on the show Richard Haydaran. He's a senior lecturer at the UP Asian Center and of course our resident political and geopolitical analyst. Richard, long day, huh?
No dull day in the Philippines. No, kakabalik ko lang from down under and in retrospect, parang boring ng buhay doon. Everything is good, everything is nice, no pollution, quality of food. Actually, now I'm looking if ano maging speech ni Tatay Digong, no, former President Rodrigo Duterte. I doubt that he's not gonna come out and potentially with guns blazing in response to the fragmentation and total disintegration of the Uniteam. I also wonder if the First Lady will also have an addendum to that. In fact, some people are making fun if there'll be especially for you. Wait, sa kabilang channel pala yan. Edition on this. But going back to this discussion. This was a slow motion train wreck. This was a slow motion train wreck. We saw this coming. In fact, in 2021, before even the election started, I wrote a piece about how House of Duterte and House of Marcos were about to clash because both Sara Duterte and Marcos wanted to run for the top position. And eventually, because of divisions within the House of Duterte, meaning Duterte wanting Bongo to run, Sara was not happy with the situation, Marcos came on top. So it was really a tactical alliance to begin with. So if there's at least one occasion where I completely agree with Sara in terms of her sincerity of her statement, it's when she said the Uniteam was really for election purposes. So I think she really laid down the predicate just a few days before officially ending itong mother of all hugot kind of speech. What I found interesting is if you rewind to 2018, wasn't it? 2017, when Leni Robredo resigned or was forced to resign, essentially driven out of the cabinet of Duterte, the father of the current vice president, ganon din yung approach na. Medyo malumanay, parang lumalabas na siya pa yung victim. And Sara Duterte did not articulate it, but I think what she was implying here, I'm trying to read what she was implying, is that dahil sa politika, naapektuhan yung kanyang abilidad to execute her job in the best way possible. And let's be honest, you look at all sorts of studies, the latest PISA rankings, on all fronts, the education sector in the Philippines is also a slow motion train wreck. So in a way, you could say maybe this is our heroic sacrifice, or at least that will be the narrative that her side will try to drive, aside from blaming President Marcos. But President Marcos can also come out of this with complete plausible deniability and say, on my side, I was always her number one fan. I always supported them. I believe in unity. I'm grateful to her. And whatever she chooses, that's her choice. But he can easily say na hindi ako yung nagpaalis sa kanya. Siya mismo ang taos puso na nag-resign dito. So I think there's some room here
Yeah.
for this attrition warfare
Yeah.
to continue, but not all-out war kaagad yet.
It's going to be a battle of the spin doctors. I found it interesting that even though she didn't give a reason, everyone understands that this is a very much a political thing. The first thing I want to know from you is, do you agree, as what everyone has, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have been saying, is that this is the start of her being rebranded as the face of the opposition?
Well, I mean, we know that there are clear policy differences between Sara Duterte and the family on one hand, and Marcos, and clearly one of them is the West Philippine Sea issue, right? I mean, she's quite infamous, or some would say famous, for the no comment essentially position on the whole West Philippine Sea issue. So actually, from an administrative operational standpoint, I wonder how comfortable Marcos would be discussing a very strong anti-China position when it comes to national security issues with Sara Duterte being around. So probably it made sense for her to no longer be in the cabinet, considering the high stakes of the differences here. Now, is she going to be the face of the opposition? It will depend on the traditional opposition. We understand that the traditional opposition is divided in between what I call never Marcos versus never Duterte. So there are groups in the opposition who are saying, no. When it comes to these two dynasties, our bigger concern are the Dutertes, and we have to make sure that the Dutertes will never claw their way back to the Malacanang. And they were the ultimate also train wreck, I mean, word of the day, for Philippine democracy. But there are also many in the opposition who are in the never Marcos, the never again movement. And for them, Marcos Jr. is still a threat to our democracy, and that Dutertes are now a distraction. So I think the traditional opposition is quite divided, but I won't be surprised there would be multiple oppositions in the coming months and, of course, ahead of the next year's election. So you have to make a distinction between ideological opposition, traditional opposition on one hand, and effectively the new opposition because of political differences and the disintegration of the Uniteam. Of course, sarcastically, I would say there's also the opposition of naging opposition dahil hindi binigyan ng position, right? There are also those kind of people who are waiting for their axe to grind as the election comes in.
Hey, Richard, do you think that this was really the product of a slow progression of events as we laid it down for you, or do you think this was more planned? Because if you take a look at the timing, it is 6 months before election period, mid-January. Filing of candidacies is October 1 to 8. I mean, she is vice president, but also, I mean, assembling a strong opposition lineup in the lead to the 2028 polls. We know the 2025 polls also counts very much. I mean, what do you see here? Was
Right.
there a specific tipping point?
Right, good question. I think, I don't know kung nakinig si Marcos at Malacanang sa mga vlogs namin, but the issue of grand coalition came up earlier this month when President Marcos Jr. discussed the possibility of a coalition of different parties as part of the administration ticket come 2025. And guess what? Hindi kasamang hukbong. And definitely hindi kasama ang PDP Laban, at least yung faction ni Cuisi and Rodrigo Duterte. So I think 3 months earlier already, there was a signal that Sara Duterte or the whole Duterte camp will not be part of the administration. So I'm not sure how can you say this was all planned, because what was happening here was really a back and forth ping pong, right? There were times when the Dutertes took on the offensive position. Look at President Duterte going all guns blazing earlier this year, questioning the president's competence and even more. And then there were times that Marcos and sometimes the First Lady also pushed back quite aggressively. So it has been a ping pong between the two houses. And I think eventually right now, the battle lines are pretty much drawn. And to be fair to Sara Duterte, she was in a boiling frog situation, right? The more she waited and the more she stayed inside the cabinet, the more she was going to be cornered and bogged down. So I think it makes sense for her to have some time to prepare as the de facto leader of not necessarily the opposition, but at least one of the major oppositions to the administration come 2025. But as we know in the Philippines, unlike in the United States or other flagship democracies, midterms tend to be pro-incumbency, given the momentum of the incumbency, given the resources of the state. So Sara, if she ever becomes the face of the opposition, will be coming in from a position of relative weakness. Although they have a couple of pretty strong candidates for the Senate, including her brother, Baste, or if not, the two brothers, based on some of the preliminary surveys we're looking at.
Richard, I think it's important to note that this is the third consecutive administration where the vice president quit the cabinet of the Philippine president.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I didn't
So-
even realize that.
How might the resignations of former Vice Presidents Binay and Robredo compare or contrast to this one of VP Sara?
Yeah, I mean, the vice presidency is probably one of the most perilous positions in the Philippines. Sarcastically, it has been dismissed as a spare tire. But at the same time, it's also the office that is a heartbeat away from the presidency. And once you're a vice president, you're assumed to be essentially the top candidate to succeed the current president. That's why even in the United States, as we speak right now, Trump is scratching his head if he's going to get kind of a charismatic person to be his vice president, but not too charismatic to overshadow him. So imagine this is happening in the US when the vice president run under one ticket. So in the Philippines, when actually the two positions are contested separately, and the tendency is most of the time it's not based on a Uniteam, although we had the Noibi in 2010 and now the Uniteam, it is quite assumed that there'll always be some tension, and management of that tension will always be very, very difficult. And this time, it was really just untenable. I think this was almost inevitable if you look at how things have turned out. So that's why, for people who want to be the president, maybe you want to sit out the vice presidency. It's a very, very perilous position. For a while, the vice presidents from Erap to Arroyo had a good shot of being presidents, but actually, essentially the 21st century has not been good to Filipino vice presidents. So it's the last political position I will recommend to anyone who wants really the highest office. But then again, it's also a heartbeat away from the presidency, so the temptations are probably too strong
Richard,
for some people to pass on.
Gusto ko malaman yung reaction mo dun sa speech ni Vice President. I did see your tweet. Sabi mo, ano sabi niya? I mean, tell us candidly. How did you find that speech? What did you observe?
Well, I
There
mean,
wasn't
I
much to
just
go
check
by.
the comment sections. I mean, I sometimes I just post stuff to see the comments because the comments are a field day to me in terms of the Zarzuela of comments. For me, I could see the struggle of the vice president. I'm kidding aside. I'm quite sarcastic, obviously, on Twitter. There are nicer versions of me elsewhere. No, I think she was really struggling because she didn't want to come out as bitter. She didn't want to come out as ungrateful. She didn't want to come out as power hungry. So weirdly, she came out kind of like Lenny. So you just put side to side speech of
Parang she
Lenny
was
Robredo
managing
and
her
speech ni Sara
emotions.
Duterte.
Yeah.
They kind of come off quite similar, which is for me another irony.
Which is
Maybe
the
that's what
safest
the vice
road to
president
take,
does.
right? It's the
Bumabait ka sa
safest
office na yan.
kasi, oh.
Nakakabait ang vice presidency sa Pilipinas.
I want to come back to you saying that she isn't coming at this from a strong position. That makes her a bit more vulnerable now. So what are her options from here? Midterms is coming up, as we were just saying. Does she run for Congress? Does her brother run for Congress? Do they consolidate their base there?
Can she resign as vice president
and
then
run? What are her feasible options from here?
Yeah, we are in uncharted territories. I mean, if you look at the Philippine politics today, we're kind of like the Berlin of, like new Cold War is here. U.S.-China competition. There's also the great power competition. Then there could be the ICC element in the near future, if we were to believe some of the people who claim to have access or understanding of the timetable of ICC. Then there are the investigations against Duterte. So the Dutertes are really in a very tough position. They're quite cornered. And when you corner a very rambunctious and ferocious political dynasty like Duterte's, I won't be surprised they will pull off some crazy, out of the box unorthodox counter move. So I won't be completely shocked if suddenly she even decides to, run back in Davao, right? To just give up the vice presidency, because at this time the vice president is like an empty shell, right? And her strategic depth is back in Davao. And if Basta Duterte runs for the higher office, if Polong runs for the higher office, who's going to be back home and to protect the rear guard? Because let's not kid ourselves. The other side is potentially also pushing for their rivals in Davao to make inroads into the Duterte camp. So they're going to be in this kind of this could be like a battle of Waterloo. Like it could come from all different directions. So if you imagine, I have no envy for the position that Sara Duterte finds herself in right now. At the same time, I'm the last person to underestimate them. I think they made many strategic mistakes. I think there was a lot of hubris in a lot of their positioning. I think Marcos quietly cut them to the size, but they're not done. So I agree that tapos na yung first chapter. So I think this was the final act of a 3-4 act part. But we're now moving to second chapter. So abangan, there'll be more plot twists, and looking forward to joining you guys for breaking this down more.
We're running out of time, but just very quickly, I wonder if you have thoughts on what happens to where Senator Amy Marcos naman will go from here. She's also caught in a very tight position. She's the one who convinced Sara to run alongside her brother. We know she's very close to VP Sara. At the same time, we also know that she has a bit of a rift with the president. Where does this leave her?
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, of all major figures, she's probably the most, squeezed in between, considering everything. But, you could say always blood is thicker than, political alliance. But you can also say, Filipino politicians, my goodness, especially veteran politicians, are master navigators. I don't think they'll have much problem navigating this latest fault line. And let's be honest, I think this was coming for quite some time. Not to mention, I think, remember, Baste a few months ago also, threw some shades at Amy Marcos or something like that. So I'm not worried for her making the necessary adjustments. And if you're Amy Marcos right now, you're going to be very, very practical. Because if you look at the surveys, I think she's barely in the top 5 or 6. And it's really the top 4 or 5 who are runaway in terms of their numbers. The next 15 to 20 candidates are actually competitive. So I think Amy Marcos is going to be very, very practical in her calculation in the coming months if she wants to regain that seat or be reelected with seat in Senate.
Richard, final question on this topic. What is your grade for the Vice President as Education Secretary? If you can, give us a grade.
Is this the fast talk part?
And who do you think can replace her?
What name?
That's a very, very good question. I mean, I half sarcastically joke na maybe Lenny could be the next VP, and that would be a poetic justice. But I doubt. I know Lenny's going to run for I think mayor or governor office or local government office. I agree with my former colleague in LaSalle, Professor Contreras, that this is where Marcos has the chance for a strategic decision, and he can strike at 2 birds with 1 stone by giving this position to someone like Balisacan, right? If you look at Secretary Balisacan, he also worked in President Aquino's cabinet, not necessarily yellow or belong to the opposition, but someone who's very bipartisan and someone who's very technocratically competent. I really hope they get someone who, yes, I agree also with my colleague, Professor Contreras, you need someone with some sort of a PhD or some sort of a background in education because malala talaga yung situation natin. And I don't want to blame Sara Duterte alone. I know I'm being too political here, but yung malalim yung problema ng education natin. And it just happened that I don't think really Sara had the right team in place to deal with this kind of other slow motion train wreck we're having, which is our education crisis. So I don't want to be also overly unfair to her. What I want to happen is Marcos this time, hopefully hindi maging political, purely political, yung decision-making niya for putting Sara Duterte, putting someone like Sara Duterte as Education Secretary. I can see the logic of Grand Coalition there, but someone sana may background talaga sa education. Kasi kawawa talaga ang bansa natin, kawawa talaga yung mga kabataan natin. And I say this as an educator and someone who's very worried about the future of this country's education landscape.
Hindi niya sinagot yung unang tanong ko eh. What?
Because maybe I want to apply, I'm just kidding.
Sige, next time na lang.
You never know. You never know.
Sa long-con na lang.
So much to talk. Thank you so much for all your insights. As always, Richard Haydarian, Senior Lecturer at the UP Asian Center.
Former Deputy Secretary Sara Duterte may have used her valedictory address to tout her achievements as education chief, but a newly released study showed the Philippines continues to lag. In fact, the new study by the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, showed Filipino students have one of the weakest creative thinking skills in the world. Students here scored 14 points on average in the 2022 Creative Thinking Assessment, well below the OECD average of 33. It also puts the Philippines at the bottom 4 among 64 countries, right next to Albania, Uzbekistan, and Morocco. All other Southeast Asian countries who joined the test, including Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Brunei, ranked well above the Philippines. Singapore landed in the top 5. PISA defines creative thinking as the competency to engage productively in the generation, evaluation, and improvement of ideas that can result in original and effective solutions. Other PISA results show Filipino students are also behind in mathematics and reading.
That's what Richard was talking about how worried he is about Filipino students. We're going to pause for a very quick one right now, but right after that, the AFP says China acted like pirates during the latest encounter at Ayungin where one Filipino soldier was severely injured. We'll speak to international law expert Romel Bagares about the Mutual Defense Treaty. When we return, keep it here.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News.
AFP Chief General Romeo Bronner Jr. likened to pirates the Chinese Coast Guard personnel who recently harassed Filipino troops conducting a resupply mission in Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea. Brian Castillo with the details.
This footage from one of the Philippine Navy's coastal patrol craft shows how the Chinese Coast Guard pursued and harassed the resupply mission to Ayungin Shoal early Monday morning. This video shows how the two Chinese boats chased and repeatedly collided with the rigid-hulled inflatable boat used by the Philippine Navy. Not far from their location, a larger China Coast Guard ship can be seen observing. The Philippine boat tried to avoid them, but one of the Chinese boats caught up and blocked their path. The subsequent scenes were not captured on video. But in a press conference earlier today, AFP Chief of Staff General Romeo Bronner confirmed that China Coast Guard personnel were armed with bolos, spears, and knives. They allegedly used these weapons to puncture the rubber boats of the Philippine Navy. The Chinese personnel who boarded one of the Philippine boats threatened the crew and took away the box and disassembled weapons that were intended for the VP Sara Madre.
They have no right or legal authority to hijack our operations and destroy Philippine vessels operating within our exclusive economic zone. For me, this is piracy already, no? Piracy, because they boarded our boats illegally. They got our equipment, no? Again, no? Parang mga pirata na po sila dun sa mga ginawa nilang actions na yan.
In total, it is alleged that China seized 7 guns. Currently, the military admits that they have not yet recovered the seized guns from the China Coast Guard. Bronner reportedly wants the guns to be returned and will also demand damages from China. Bronner also refuted allegations that the Philippine soldiers did not fight back.
No, lumaban po tayo. But then again, may mga limitations po tayo because number one, no, we were outnumbered. Yung dalawang rig natin, ang katapat niya 8.
The Philippine Coast Guard also finally explained its alleged absence in Monday's Roque mission. Their role was said to be limited after rescuing a soldier who had his finger severed.
We provided the rescue activity required, the medical aid, the towing of boats which were destroyed. Our role was limited to that.
The AFP Western Command also admitted to have made changes in the way the Roque mission was conducted to test which method would be more effective.
The Flag Officer in Command was informed, the Chief of Staff was informed, and the Secretary of National Defense.
Earlier today, Bronner personally visited and awarded the Wounded Personnel Medal to Seaman First Class Jeffrey Facundo, an underwater operator who is recovering at a hospital in Puerto Princesa City, Palawan. Facundo is the soldier who lost a finger during the incident.
Pag gumaling ka pa, may balak kang bumalik. Yes, sir. Kahit saan, sir, basta may order tayo. Laban tayo, sir.
Even though some Filipino soldiers were injured, China has categorically denied acting aggressively. They claim that their interception of Philippine boats was done in a professional manner and that they did not take direct action against the Filipino soldiers. For News 5, Brian Castillo, we are One News.
But still no official word from Malacanang about China's latest aggression at Ayungin Shoal, although the DFA has spoken up. In a statement, the Department of Foreign Affairs says it denounces the illegal and aggressive actions of Chinese authorities that resulted in personnel injury and vessel damage. The DFA has been exerting efforts to rebuild a conducive environment for dialogue and consultation with China. This cannot be achieved if China's words do not match their actions on the waters. We now know as well that the China Coast Guard chased, rammed, and boarded Philippine Navy boats off a Union Shoal, as the report was just saying. They also seized firearms and at least one rubber boat from Philippine soldiers. And as we said, the encounter left 8 personnel injured, including one who lost a finger. With this, the Philippines filed its 30th note verbal against China. That's just for this year alone. The U.S. Pentagon, also condemned China for its actions and reaffirmed the United States' commitment to the Philippines.
We condemn the escalatory and irresponsible actions by the PRC to deny the Philippines from executing a lawful maritime operation in the South China Sea. This kind of behavior is provocative, it's reckless, it's unnecessary, and as you highlight, it could lead to something bigger and more violent. And so we're going to continue to stand with our Philippine allies.
Here to talk us through the implications of this latest aggression by China, we have with us international law professor, attorney Romel Bagares. Good evening, attorney.
Good evening, everyone, and also to the viewers of the program.
Attorney Romel, let's go straight to the question everybody's been dying to ask. Taking a look at the videos and dissecting what happened, does this constitute an attack on a public and armed vessel of the Philippines, and can it invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty? And is that why the government has been kind of slow to release their statements on what happened in June 17?
Well, while it's very concerning, and in fact, I would characterize it as a further escalation of what's happening there, I wouldn't characterize it as something that really amounts to an armed attack. International law, the test is scale and effects. No? And if you look at the jurisprudence of international tribunals, scale and effects would usually involve deaths and widespread destruction of facilities. So right now, what happened, although it's quite serious, and many people think, and I also tend to think, that it's just a matter of time before someone actually gets killed. But right now, it's not yet an armed attack under international, and even under the provisions of the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951.
But they boarded the Philippine, the vessel, the RIB. Is that allowed? Isn't this already, as the AFP called it, they call it piracy. What is our defense? Do we just, stand there and let this progress?
As I said, in international, there are rules, because we're talking here of 2 sovereign countries, 2 sovereign states. And the threshold is scale and effects. In the case of Nicaragua versus U.S., the International Court of Justice said that the scale and effects test would mean that you have the use of force that amounts to the action of a regular armed force. So that would have, and in another case, that is elaborated on as involving deaths and widespread destruction of facilities. Of course, what China did is illegal. No? You're talking here of Philippine Navy vessels, and they are actually protected by sovereign immunity. And under international, you can only use force if there was reason for it, and only in a proportional manner. That's the requirement of international. And I don't really see any reason why China would do that board our vessels and even hurt soldiers. No? Another point is that, it does not qualify as piracy under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, because piracy is always for private ends. That's one of the necessary elements of piracy under the Law of the Sea. And this one obviously involves a state, and the injury committed was not for private ends. So it does not qualify as piracy, but I would actually characterize it as some deployment of the use of force that does not really rise yet to an armed attack.
So if not the Mutual Defense Treaty, what law under UNCLOS can the Philippines lean on as far as this injury is concerned?
Well, there was seizure, and I understand the boat the boats have not yet been returned. There's a procedure in the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea where you can file a suit for the return of those vessels that were seized, and also for damages. That is the remedy available right now that I can think of under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So remember, the response is always proportionate. No? So this is not yet something that would actually amount to a shooting war as they stand.
Attorney Romel, many pundits believe na the Mutual Defense Treaty should be invoked, not necessarily to go to war or to declare war, but to initiate discussions with the U.S., particularly Section 4 of the MDT, which highlights the consultation requirement, which says na both parties should consult on what measures should be taken for common defense. Do you agree with that? And what do you think these consultations will look like and what should come out of them?
Well, I think the bigger picture really for us is that we need to clarify with the US exactly what they mean when they say that they will defend our interests. Because I think there is ambiguity by design in the MDT. They're asking a lot from us. They want us to stake almost everything. They even included the defense of Taiwan as one of the things that they want us to do. And accordingly or purportedly under the cover of the MDT, but that's not even covered by the MDT. It's not part of the language of the MDT. And another thing that needs to be raised is that the U.S. policy right now with respect to the MDT only includes vessels and maritime and metropolitan territories. It does not include contested territories in the South China Sea. So right now we have a situation where the U.S. would say that the protections under the MDT will cover the exclusive economic zone because of the arbitral award, our vessels, the Coast Guard vessels and the Navy vessels, but not territories there that are contested. That would include the Pag-asa, Calayan Island, and Scarborough Shoal. These are not covered by the MDT. We need to clarify with the U.S. We need to ask them whether or not under the MDT, if anything happens in Scarborough Shoal or in Calayan, that will be covered by the MDT.
Attorney, I remember there was a meeting in 2023 between, I think, the President and possibly the Defense Chief of the United States. I think they clarified the guidelines of the MDT, saying that they're including the whole of South China Sea. Hindi ba nalinawan na doon na kasama yung disputed areas?
I don't think so, because the standing U.S. policy right now, and a lot of scholars have come out with their own statements on that, that the U.S. has no position on who actually owns the contested territories. So we're talking here of rocks and high tide elevations in the South China Sea. And if you see the statements of the U.S., they're quite ambiguously crafted. They do not actually say that the MDT would cover these disputed rocks and high tide elevations in the South China Sea. Only vessels of the Coast Guard and the Navy, and then those vessels that are found in the exclusive economic zone by virtue of the arbitral award that would cover actually a Union Shoal. But that much we can say of the MDT.
To be honest, the details of what happened in June 17 are still quite hazy. We have been struggling to get
information
on
the incident,
how it went down. For example, in this resupply mission, usually we would see the Onaiza Mays being escorted by Philippine Coast Guard vessels to Ayungin. But in this case, we are seeing a Navy boat. We don't know if this was escorted by gray ships or Navy ships. But just in case, the Armed Forces of the Philippines is changing tactics as to the resupply mission. And if we did send Philippine navies instead of Philippine Coast Guard vessels, is that an escalation on our part? Are we allowed to do that?
Because, well, basically, we're not saying that it's a military operation, no longer a civilian one, right? So I think the armed forces should really carefully think up through things, step back and look at what's at stake here, and perhaps the U.S. as a treaty partner should make sure that they have a red line, a hotline with China, because as things stand, a shooting war could erupt anytime soon, given the further escalations there. And this is the first time that China did that. They boarded rubber boats. Apparently, that's what I got. Rubber boats with the Philippine Navy, and seized one or two, and also seized weapons. And that's really quite serious as far as I'm concerned.
Perhaps part of the reason there was an escalation this time around was because of China's new rule, which, as we know, took effect June 15 over the weekend, right? This new rule states that they can unilaterally detain trespassers in the South China Sea for up to 60 days without trial. So perhaps the armed forces of the Philippines braced for that. Talk us through the legality of China imposing such a rule.
Well, China is also a party to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. There's actually a rule for seizures of that nature. There's the notion of prompt release. You can't detain for such a long period of time, and then you can only actually make an arrest if there was a violation. And there is already a standing ruling by the arbitral court saying that that area is part of the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, and therefore the Philippines has every right to be there. So this Coast Guard law, as far as I see it, is a violation of its obligations under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Even the Philippines cannot do that, cannot seize and say, well, we're going to detain you for so long without trial, because the requirements of the tribunal of the UNCLOS, the Law of the Sea, is that you have to seize and then you have to promptly release.
In short, it's illegal.
Yes, it's a violation basically of international law.
Can we file a case over that?
Yes, that's there. As I said, there's a procedure in the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea for a petition or an action for the immediate release of a vessel that was seized, and you can also ask for provisional remedies as well as damages.
As far as you know, has there been precedents, a case that might have been similar to the new rule that China imposed?
Well, we've had standing jurisprudence on when it's proper to use force and what kind of force you can use. MV Saiga would be cited by any international student studying right now in the Law of the Sea. So you have this long line of cases in the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea saying that the use of force should be justified. It cannot be deployed just like that, and then it has to be proportional in nature.
Uling katanungan, kasi parang bago yung tactic na ginamit ng China dito, yung paggamit ng bolo and spears to pierce the rubber boats. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, usually it would be water cannons, but this time it's actually weapons, spears.
Yeah, I mean, China is trying to push the limit. They're pushing the envelope because I'm sure they know the jurisprudence in the use of force, that they would try to prevent or they would not use guns, but they will use some other means to further their purposes. So it's actually really the gray zone tactics again of China. And I think for the Philippines, it has to be creative in how it will make its legal arguments, because perhaps the Philippines should try to test the limits of current jurisprudence and try to gather all of the evidence so far and make a creative argumentation as to the violations made by China, that this is now already an accumulation of incidents amounting to something else. That's very clear now. I think the arbitral award itself said that the gray zone tactics being used by China are a violation of the law of the sea.
Well, to be honest, what's also bothering me is the lack of video evidence this time around. I mean, lahat ng water cannon nakita natin, laser pointing, but this time we don't have video of what actually happened.
Except for that cell phone video of the two boats colliding.
Which only was released recently.
2 days after the incident, yeah.
Well, I'm sure, just like you mentioned, the Philippine contingent has to get back to the drawing board and see what this means from all angles. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us your insights. We have with us international law professor, attorney Romel Bagares.
Pleasure.
And before we go, time now for our big picture tonight. We have this photo of the custom-made timeless barong designed and by renowned Filipino designer Francis Libiran. This will be worn by Olympians Carlo Paalam and Nesty Petesio during the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Crafted from piña husi cloth, the barong features a removable silk organdy sling embroidered with warrior designs inspired by pintados and sun rays, signifying valor and patriotism. According to the POC, or the Philippine Olympic Committee, every element of the design symbolizes bravery and national pride, as well as the rich cultural heritage of the Philippines. So far, the Philippines has 15 qualified athletes for the Olympics, but more are expected to be included in the coming weeks, particularly in athletics, swimming, and golf. Yun na natin, flag bearer natin.
The
But ang
countdown.
ganda,
Boxers ngayon.
the designs.
Very nice. And
Very,
the countdown
very
is on
nice.
because only a month left.
Oh, yes,
One
that's
month
right.
lang ba?
1 month left. July
Yes.
26.
26.
Sabi ni Bambol, ano daw, 10 atleta pa daw
So,
inaasahan.
Wow! Until
That's a
then.
lot.
From now
More
until
than 20.
then.
Tingnan natin. Abangan natin yan. And
But very nice, the outfit.
what a way to,
They-
counter everything that's
Oh,
happened
nga,
today, no?
the symbol for nationalism, that couldn't have come at a better time, right?
Well, we hope sports does bring peace in the way we want it to. Well, in the meantime, that's it for the show tonight.
we are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.